Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Dark Matter Season 3, Episode 4, All the Time in the World. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Dark Matter, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Dark Matter up to Season 3, Episode 4. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So before I get into this episode, since I didn't cover last week's episode, I have to touch on what happened in last week's episode with a character shift for Season 3, where 6 has apparently left the show, or at least temporarily, but who knows, and has joined like a colony of blue-collar workers or whatever, which made sense for his character, but I'm really unhappy with him leaving the show. And then we get two more characters to take his place, with Solara and Adrian. Now, Adrian is sort of a stand-in for Tabor, who apparently took over. Tabor is, of course, played by David Hewlett, who I know as Rodney McKay, and he acted just like Rodney McKay from Stargate Atlantis, and I couldn't help but think of him as Rodney McKay. But I had a feeling they might have wanted to get him on to become a permanent cast member, but for some reason he wasn't unavailable to do so, so they made up this other character who was supposed to be like his protege or something, who ends up taking over for him, named Adrian. And then Adrian has a big tough bodyguard named Solara. Now I'm really unhappy about this. I'm not gonna badmouth the show overall because it's still putting out good episodes like this one, so which I'll get into shortly. But I'm unhappy about the character dynamics that they're setting up for Season 3. Maybe they'll sell me on it later. But first of all, as I mentioned before, I was unhappy that Nyx had died, and the Solara character just seems like a lesser version of Nyx to me. So I'm unhappy about this shift, that they should have just kept Nyx instead of shifting characters too much, because I was just getting used to her. Now I had to get used to these other characters. And plus, the way that these two characters, especially in this episode, she seemed to treat them like they were always there. It kind of annoys me because I don't know who these people are, and I don't know. They just seemed forced into the main dynamic of the crew, and it just doesn't seem like it was pulled off very well. And of course, has the Solara is like a lesser version of Nyx, and Adrian's like a lesser version of Tabor. So I'm not very happy with this. And I was thinking before, how can they get rid of 6, because they barely have any main characters on the ship left. That's why they had to introduce these two new characters, but I don't really think that they work. And so I don't know, I'm very skeptical, I'll put it that way, going forward. And but through that last week's episode, when 6 was on the planet, I kind of got the feeling that he was going to stay behind. But I will say this, at least they didn't kill him off. So there's the opportunity to bring him back into the show. But yeah, he was a character, and I was just getting used to the dynamic between him and 2, and they seem to be actually, because after he betrayed them last year, they seem to be forming this bond and becoming this team, and then they take him away. That really bothered me. But anyway, let's get into this episode, because this is actually a really good episode. It's a time loop episode with a twist. Now, there is a big risk of time loop episodes getting repetitive. Of course, we've seen, most notably, we've seen it in movies like Groundhog Day. Of course, anyone has to mention Groundhog Day whenever a time loop story comes up, which annoys me because Groundhog Day does not have a monopoly on time loop stories. And I've said this on my channel before. It always bothers me when people say, oh, this is just like Groundhog Day. Sorry, time loop stories is its own genre. Groundhog Day is not the only one in existence. Just because the time loop story is done doesn't mean it's like Groundhog Day. But in general, like, the time loop story is a bit limiting, and you do sort of relate it with the other time loop stories that you've seen. Like, I always think of episodes from shows like The X-Files. They did a really good time loop story called Monday. And then, of course, Star Trek Next Generation, Cause and Effect, which actually came before Groundhog's Day. And so when I saw Groundhog's Day, I was like, oh, this is just like Cause and Effect. But anyway, and then there's, but the one that this episode in particular reminded me the most of was Stargate SG1 episode, which I'm blanking on the name for at the moment, but it's like something about opportunity. Anyway, it was like one of my favorite SG1 episodes, and I think is one of the best time loop stories done. And this episode reminded me a lot of that, but it put its own like interesting spin on it. Now I know the show creator, showrunner Joe Malozzi was involved in Stargate, but I don't think he was involved in SG1, or at least not in the time that episode came out. But you know, he has some sort of connection to Stargate, so maybe some inspiration was taken there, but I don't think it was a ripoff of that episode. It just reminded me of it, and in fact I really liked this episode. Put its own interesting spin on it. In some cases I think they were trying to be a bit too original, and it felt a bit disjointed, but what I really liked about this episode was the fact that it started you right towards the end of or towards the middle in the time loop. We didn't see it beginning, which is actually, I think, the first time I've ever seen it done this way, and it was great. In fact, this episode, for the most part, it's, you know, it treats the audience like they know what's going on, like and basically it's true. Pretty much most people watching the show are sci-fi fans, and they've seen a lot of science fiction, so they don't have to have things explained to them. When they see a time loop, they go, okay, that's a time loop. And that was the issue with Cause and Effect, is that a lot of people love that episode of Next Generation, but I think it's just okay, because it's just too slow paced. It's a bit too repetitive, even for a time loop. A lot of people are like, well, it's the point. It's supposed to be repetitive. Yeah, I know that is the point for time loop episodes, but there is still such a thing as time loop episodes being too repetitive, which Cause and Effect was, and it was too slow. But like for this episode example, was not too repetitive, and it was a time loop episode, and I loved it. I loved how they purposely avoided being too repetitive, and part of the way they were able to do that was by to start you right in the middle of the time loop, and I love that. And it treats the audience like they're smart, like they know what's going on, which for the most part is probably very true. I doubt there's very few people who were actually confused about what was going on as soon as the episode started, and they see three doing the same actions over and over again. We were able to pick it up. This is a time loop. And so I love that. I love how they treat the audience like they're smart. And it reminded me of the SG1 episode because of the way, like in that episode, Colonel Neil and Teal sort of treated it as an opportunity to just joke around, mess around, and do whatever they want, because they get so tired of repeating the same day over and over again. And you get that a bit with 3, where he just, and the comedic aspect of it was worked really well. And I especially loved, of course, the scene where he's like, you know, singing in French with the android who's teaching him French. It was also so hilarious how he was like, at first when the android was repairing the ship and told him the technical things, so it's like, I'm gonna remember this technical things and tell the android. And every time he's like, he tries to repeat it and he gets it wrong. He's like, you do the thingy and the what's it, and that was hilarious. It was a bit of a stretch, I think, that he actually had to learn it in French before he could actually just say it in English. I think that was a bit of a stretch, but it worked comedy wise, so I'll give it a pass on that. So I do, and I love how it introduced the elements, like the outside elements of the bounty hunter, And I saw in the previously on at the start of the episode that Rio had sent out all these bounty hunters, and I don't remember that scene at all from the previous episode, so I must have missed it. But I think it reminded me of like Darth Vader sending out all the bounty hunters off after Han Solo, and I'm sure that's probably the same sort of feel that they're going for. But I like that. I thought it was very interesting, and I love how they added that into this episode as another sort of thing that they needed to avoid. And the fact that the guy eventually started being in a time loop just like 3 also like made it very intense, very scary, because you're like, holy shit, if they do the time loop again, this guy actually has an advantage because he knows that he's looping now. And it was so great, and it was a great element to this time loop story. It added an intensity to it and a level of suspense, so it wasn't just comedic, but the comedy and the suspense sort of flowed well. So it was just a really well constructed episode. Okay, so the thing at the end with the android skipping the future, that I felt was a bit more jarring, and I don't know if that kind of fit as well into this episode. It kind of felt like the episode, at this point, the episode was trying to do too much. It was too sort of disconnected, and it felt like trying to explain, it's like a Simpsons episode where the Simpsons starts out in one storyline and then flows into an entirely different storyline that has nothing to do with the first one, which works because it's a half-hour comedy episode, so who cares? But in a dramatic episode like this, I kind of got that feeling where it felt a bit too sort of disconnected from everything else before, and it didn't kind of flow. Like I said, the comedy stuff with 3 flowed perfectly into the bounty hunter stuff, whereas I felt the android skipping in the future, that just felt like too much, like the episode was just trying to do too much. But that being said, I didn't hate it. Actually, I really liked it as well. I just don't know if it flowed well, but it gave me a feeling of like, compared it to like Song of Ice and Fire, with Daenerys' visions in the House of the Undying. I wouldn't say Game of Thrones, but it actually reminds me more of the books. I think, with Daenerys going into the House of the Undying, having all these visions of the future, like you see visions of the Red Wedding and certain stuff that will happen in the future, and I get the same, that they were going for the same sort of feeling here, and I think it really worked, where the android gets glimpses of the future, sees 3 shooting her, sees her being carved up by this creator guy. That was very fucking scary, and sees her in the future with 5 as an old woman. Now, that scene kind of bothered me because you can't dress up the actress and who's playing 5 in old lady makeup. It just doesn't work. It just felt really fake to me. But I was sort of distracted by this 16-year-old or however old she is in old lady makeup. It's just, I don't know, didn't work. It just distracted me. It's like, that doesn't make sense. But what they were going for with the story, though, was cool. And I liked the way that the android looked in the future, by the way. I thought that was really cool. So I like how we get these little glimpses of the future. And it's probably going to, of course, play into what's going to happen this season. So I love that. I love that we got these little visions. But I don't know. I just thought the way they integrated it into this episode wasn't pulled off the best. But I love how when the android came back, she just ripped out the time machine and just broke it. So overall, I don't think this episode was perfect, but it was great. It was a lot of fun. It was one of the better time loop stories that I've seen, because it avoided being too repetitive, and it doesn't treat the audience like idiots. It assumes that you'll be able to understand and get it right away, and which is true. So for my rating for this episode, I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. A 9, excellent. It was a great episode, a lot of fun. The actors played it out very well, and the intensity and the comedy and everything sort of worked. Even though I thought the visions were a bit jarring, it was still very interesting to get these visions for the future, and it'll be interesting to see what effect this has on the show going forward. So it's great. Love the episode. So that's it for my review of All the Time in the World. Be sure to check back here as I continue to review episodes of Dark Matter. Not every week, but I will touch back several more times during the season. And also be sure to check out my channel for many more videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Orphan Black, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.